Welcome to the final program in our series of Sister Bay Stories presentations about important families and businesses in Sister Bay. Tonight we are featuring the story of Masterfreeze, a very interesting manufacturing business that ran from 1945 to 1966 on the site of what is today the Door Hotel. And it's going to be presented by Linda Beckstrom, who is the granddaughter of the founder of Masterfreeze, Ellsworth Anderson. It really is a fascinating story. I didn't grow up here as many of you did, but it is a fascinating story to me about this manufacturing facility that started in Sister Bay, 1946, 45, when the population of Sister Bay was 309. And this is an enterprise that grew over time to employ 350 people at its peak, from Egg Harbor to Gills Rock. So it was a major force in Sister Bay for the period that it was here. And a lot of you are connected in some way to it. What struck me as I was rereading Linda's book today is not just the stories of the people who were connected to it, but honestly the quality of the products. Because if you look in the book, and Linda will tell you more about this, but the business ended in 1966. There are Masterfreeze coolers and freezers that are still in operation today. So if you go to the ice cream factory, Linda will show this, but I mean, there are still some of these products in operation today. That speaks well for their quality. The stories, though, of the people like you who are connected in some way to Masterfreeze, I found particularly interesting. And if you'll indulge me, I just want to read excerpts from a couple of those stories that Linda has assembled in her book. So one of them is from Don Overby, who said, "My brother Bud Overby worked there, but I did not. I joined the Army in April of 1958, went to basic training at Fort Dix, and there, right behind the mess table, there it was, a freezer, Masterfreeze, Sister Bay, Wisconsin." Here's a little quote from Kathy Springer. "My father, Willard Kramer, worked there during the winters as he had too much farm work to attend to during the summer. We had a walk-in freezer at the patio drive-in." And I think Linda will talk about that as well. And then I wanted to just, in keeping with what I said earlier about the durability and quality of the products, I want to read a note from Jay Anderson, who says, and is quoted in the book as saying this: this is grandson Jay Anderson, "I've always been very proud of the fact that my grandfather started Masterfreeze and that hundreds of local employee families were sustained by this business. I'm proud of the quality of the product that was still operating decades later behind many of these businesses in Door County and beyond." We have with us tonight not only you who have memories of Masterfreeze, but we also have a number of the family members of the Anderson and Beckstrom families. So we thank all of you for coming. But you know, to make the point about the connection, how many of you have family members who might have worked for Masterfreeze back in the day? Okay, all right, very good. And I know that we've got one person who's going to answer this next question. How many of you yourself worked for Masterfreeze? There we go, Jerry Knudsen. We expect some stories later, Jerry. All right, but I'll tell you, we want to especially thank tonight Linda Beckstrom for putting this together. And Linda, as I mentioned, is the granddaughter of Ellsworth and Doris Hanson Anderson. Ellsworth, the founder of Masterfreeze. Linda is a Gibraltar graduate. She was an art major and spent a career in graphic design, lives today in Milwaukee. And I just have to add this. This book has been so meticulously researched and all these great stories assembled. Linda, I'm sure that your grandparents would be very proud to know the amount of work that you put into preserving the history of your family and this important business. So, Linda Beckstrom.
Thank you for inviting me here tonight. The front row was almost all cousins on both my Anderson and my Beckstrom side of my family. A couple of very close family friends on the end there. So I'm a little excited and I'll try not to go too fast. First I want to start on behalf of the Anderson family. I acknowledge the original peoples and primary caretakers of this beautiful peninsula, the Potawatomi, Menominee, Ho-Chunk, and others. The land our ancestors farmed and we now stand on is part of their homelands. We wish to pay respect to these roots of local land connections and encourage our generation to continue to value the ecological and cultural traditions, particularly our deep connection to this beautiful Door County Peninsula. As Terry told you, between 45 and 66, the Masterfreeze company took over the main street in Sister Bay at times when they were unloading their trucks. The company designed, built, and shipped modern prefabricated walk-in coolers and freezers throughout the U.S. The physical plant underwent 2 expansions in order to meet demand for the product, including building units for the military. Even after closing, the property continued to be referred to as the Masterfreeze building. There you go. Since starting this project, I've been following all the Door County historical groups and realize that many of the recent presentations are being made by my classmates. So I guess it's time for us to remember local history before we too are gone. I'm going to start with a little bit of background information that I didn't write in the book, but I went down, the rabbit hole of research. So I started writing the history of Masterfreeze after moving my mom about 2.5 years ago, and found information in the bottom of a chest from Norway, in the bottom of a box, inside the bottom of a box. There were photos and memorabilia, things that I had not seen before, even though she had given a presentation when the building was raised, before the building was raised, at the closing of the walkway shops. So I knew there were some basic facts that she had that I could draw on for that. So we had a family reunion on the Anderson side coming up in about 2 months after I found this stash. And I whipped up something and the cousins loved it and told me to make more and do more work and get it out into the world, so I did. I'm going to throw in a little bit of my family history here because it's genealogy and it's Door County and we're all related probably. All of my European ancestors settled in Door County, all of them. On the Beckstrom side, Grandpa Hank's parents, John and Lizzie, arrived from Sweden in the late 1800s, and they had a farm on Old Stage Road close to the Moravian church. That's in the middle one towards the top. And my Grandma Bertha's parents, Wenzel Waller and Mary Annie Koessl, if you recognize the name Koessl, had a farm near here for several generations afterwards. It was the Kramer family property of Carol's Corral and the patio fame. So there's a connection. The fun part after that is across the road from them was Frederick Anderson and Emma Karf's farm, my Grandpa Andy's grandparents. So they were neighbors 100 years ago. That's an 1899 map that I've drawn that from. But the earliest settlers in Door County were actually my Grandma Doris's great-great-grandparents, Hans Hansen, who were some of the Norwegian Moravians who followed Iverson into Ephraim. They had a house, they had some property which is now part of Peninsula State Park. Doris's father, Sam Hansen, was an assistant lighthouse keeper at Cana Island and Chambers Island, but that's a whole other story. And two of my aunts wrote books about it, and you can find something at the Maritime Museums because the family had a couple of tragedies out there on the islands. And my Grandma Doris's mother's family was Tostensons from Hedgehog Harbor, which we now call Gills Rock. And from having that many ancestors coming so early, you can imagine how many third and maybe fourth cousins I have living around here. We kind of started to lose track of that. All right, let's move on to the how and why of the Masterfreeze business. He went by E.F. Anderson on legal documents and in advocate articles, but they call him Andy, and so did I, so I'm going to call him Andy when I talk about him here. He was born in 1908 on the family farm, long before electricity was available up in Door County here. This was the days of spring houses, ice harvesting, and ice boxes to preserve food. I found some photos which I call the technology of the day. I spoke to my Uncle Fred just this afternoon about this part of the history, and he said he remembered as a child he came up here with his dad some summers, and they would go downtown wherever the ice house for the community was and bring back chunks for the farm. That's just another little surprise bit of information. So in the Anderson family, Alfred was a well-established mason, and he managed to send Andy to high school in Fish Creek, which is a big deal. He had to stay with another family so he could go to school there. He apparently really liked the academic life. Took on a little extra training afterwards about electricity, but mostly by a correspondence course. But soon he married Doris Hansen and started a family. So these are some samples of what early ice boxes may have looked like. One is pretty utilitarian, the other one looks kind of a fancy piece of furniture. He tried to get an electrical service company going in Sister Bay around 1930. He managed to electrify the Anderson family farm by harnessing the power of the windmill and storing the energy in a battery, which people could use in those days too for radio sets. But Door County was very minimally wired at that time, and it took until 1936 before the government started the rural electrification program. I found a sample of one of their brochures from those days. I have a quote from the REA. In 1936, 90% of U.S. farms had no electricity. They had to perform all the backbreaking work by hand, and some of you may have spent some time doing farm work, drawing water from a well or pump, no flush toilets, no refrigeration, electric lights, washing machines. All the farm chores, including milking, had to be done by hand. And without electricity, there was no access to telephone or radio. Within 1 year of that program, they added about 250,000 farm households. By 1945, 40% of the farmers had electricity, so it was pretty slow progress in those days. Andy eventually found work in Sheboygan at the J.J. Koessl Company. He was just kind of getting into refrigeration. So he moved there in 1933. He had 2 daughters at the time. The Koessl Company expanded sales and service to an office in Milwaukee, so Andy and his kids moved down there. And before you knew it, there was a 3rd daughter. And he was the manager down there. The Koessl Company got out of that business by 36, and Andy partnered with Campbell and Anderson Refrigeration Company for about 3 years. That partnership dissolved. He found another partner and changed the name to Master Refrigeration Sales and Service. So he was already using the word master. They received a War Production Board authorization to manufacture freezers and coolers. That was a federal agency that ordered equipment for World War II. And that board only lasted until the end of 1945. So that War Production Board gave him a big boost, but Andy wanted to provide to the farmers in his hometown. So he moved up to 1945 up here, but the family stayed in Milwaukee. All the kids were in school. He bought a wood shop on Main Street and started making freezers. The Milwaukee office did continue working until 1950 as a partnership that eventually ended. So the Anderson family moved all the way, everybody moved back to Door County in 1950 because business was going well here and the one in Milwaukee was shutting down. Now the name of the company was Masterfreeze Home Locker Manufacturing Company. There's a couple pictures of it painted on the side of a truck, but they're pretty small, but I think they're in here somewhere. Yeah, the first thing he put together was apparently a brochure about how to use electrified coolers. It's got pretty detailed instructions of how to keep the equipment running, when you have to oil it, what to do, what not to do. It's a little bit humorous to read in the details. But turkey farms and mink ranchers, along with the fruit growers and the dairy farms, fisheries, soon started buying the product. And there's an early picture of my Grandpa Andy in the shop. I still have a memory of those windows like that. He had to expand the building because the demand was really growing in 1951. There was a manufacturing boom in small towns all across the U.S. after the war. At this time, Masterfreeze received a contract for the Army and Air Force to build 300 walk-in coolers. And that gave this small town a nationwide reach, as Terry explained about that, finding it in the military establishments. If you go through some of the pictures here, I have a whole lot more pictures in the book than I have here, and this has different pictures than the book has, just so if you want a complete story, you know what you have to do. Success at that time was also witnessed by the Sturgeon Bay shipbuilding companies, and they also employed people from throughout the county, and I know they had a little bit bigger reach for employees. The raw materials for many industries arrived in Sturgeon Bay via the Anapian Western Railroad, which is another thing in fading from memory right now. I believe they also ended about 1966. All right, the era of peak employment began. He ran advertisements all the time, of course, starting with Help Wanted. Coincided with the end of the war, so there were able young men available to learn these trades. My mom tells me that they actually ran 3 shifts at one time, complete with whistles, right downtown in the heart of Sister Bay. It's kind of hard to imagine that, but it really exploded business. There were the engineers and designers, managers, wood shop, sheet metal and aluminum workers, procurement and salespeople, and of course there were all the hands-on workers who actually did the building and drove across the country with their semi-trailer trucks laden with the prefabricated parts to be assembled. This is one of the early expansion pictures. And I've got the deeds because I spent some time at the Register of Deeds, because you know how you open the book and you follow the trail of the story down and down, and there you go. Just about the whole Anderson family was involved in the business in some way. My mom had worked when she was in high school doing some little bit of rudimentary bookkeeping or ordering, and when he moved up to Sister Bay in the 40s, she came up in the summers and worked here and had a variety of stories to tell about those days. My grandma, of course, worked in the office as a manager and bookkeeper. My Aunt Nikki and Uncle Paul Jorgensen were in Milwaukee for a while, finishing up that business, and then they moved up here again. My Auntie Junie Jarman worked briefly before she married Charlie and started working for Jarman Excavating.
Do you want to tell me your mother's name?
Oh, my mother, Anita. I think I have a little bit more about her in here. It's in the book. And my Aunt Karen was persuaded to attend the trade shows and business expos to be the attractive young lady sitting in the booth, which she said she was not terribly thrilled to do. But look at that setup there. The whole thing. I wish I could have all those little photos. I wish we had those. And then Fred told me, my Uncle Fred Anderson told me a little bit about some of the innovation that the company did over the years. One was called the Hansen diffuser. He named it Hansen after Doris's family name, to make more efficient cooling of milk cans. There was a blast freezer that could freeze turkeys in 10 to 15 minutes. It didn't say anything about defrosting the turkeys, however. So they also developed some modular construction techniques when they worked on the military contracts. So that's a standalone building, but I don't think the military ones were usually built to be inside of their training facilities. All right, my dad, Lenny Beckstrom, was employed at Masterfreeze after he returned from the Philippines about 1946 or so. He purchased property with the intention of building a house well before he met my mother. So I guess he was planning ahead. And then he did meet Anita Anderson, and they got married, and my dad wound up with a promotion because of that. So, I found very little information about the workers in my research. There were no logs or anything, so the best I could do with the pictures we had was try to enlarge portions of them that show people working. I also reached out to the Gibraltar Alumni Facebook group, and I got some stories. I got 5 pages of notes in the back of the book, and Terry read a couple of the more endearing ones. But I did have like 35 people respond, and plus 10 from family members and a few other conversations, so about 50 people had something to say about this. I also often wonder if there were workers from Carlsville and Jacksonport. There may have been in the peak years when they had to suddenly make 300 coolers. So at this point, my generation is kind of the remainder of the keepers of the memories.
I drove that truck you just saw.
You did? Yay!
Hauling insulation from boxcars in Sturgeon Bay. Along with Harry Highlander, who had the 56 stretch.
That is so good to know. Note keeper, you get that? All right. I'm still hoping that people will once in a while stumble across some old photos and let me know. If the community knows that I'm still collecting, this is kind of a never-ending project. It would be nice to have anything else. I found a couple photos my dad had taken. They were of the buildings, not of the people making them. So, kind of, you're proud of the end product, but you forget that all along the way you're needing real life people to do the work. Yes, I thought I'd credit all the people who gave me some information. Oh yes, that's workers. I included, that's Alfred Anderson as a stonemason and the great-grandfather. I think you've got a little bit ahead, Terry.
Okay.
Who's the guy on the right?
I'm giving to you. The middle column was Nels Henkenet from Egg Harbor. Their reporter always put something in the Advocate where he was. He apparently got around a lot because there was dozens of listings of that. And then on the right, that's my picture of my dad because he's my dad. And he worked for Masterfreeze, and he was building our house, and his signature overalls, although when you look at those old photos, they're all wearing those wonderful denim Oshkosh B'gosh overalls. All right, the leap forward now into the partnership with the Armstrong Company, Armstrong Contracting and Supply Corporation. They produced insulating materials and had outlets all over the country. Initially, they were a competitor to Masterfreeze, being able to ship farther and faster from locations. I think they were headquartered in Missouri and Pennsylvania, so they're much more central located. But they ran across some Masterfreeze products and really liked what they did. The flexibility of their design offered them a deal that could benefit both companies, and it lasted for a number of years. There's an 8-page booklet that's inserted in the book, and there's also a copies out there detailing all of the construction techniques. It's a little amazing. With that boost, Masterfreeze added an additional 4,200 square feet to the manufacturing area, improved the office. Total footprint at this time was 27,000 square feet. The biggest change that was noticeable to the community that they moved their shipping dock from over the main street to around the side off of Mill Road, 2 bays for the trucks to back up to. And he did have in one of the ads a thank you to Village of Sister Bay for being so patient over the years of blocking traffic. So the coolers they'd done earlier for the Air Force and the Army were relatively large. These new ones were huge. They had built peanut units from the East Coast to the West. Some of them were over 200 feet long. The Minneapolis Cold Storage Building was considered the largest prefab cold storage building in the world. consisting of over 700,000 square cubic feet. And the building was actually a 2-story public warehouse. Probably the hardest part for me in the book, and even telling the story now, is figuring out what happened, why the business folded in '66. Well, rising costs were one of the issues, of course. Transporting supplies into Sister Bay and then shipping the products out was costly due to the remote location up here. We know how, we got one thumb. There's only one way out. The business initially started just for the farmers and fishermen and the fruit growers. You could not imagine what was going to happen over the next 15, 20 years that would become nationwide. It was not planned to be convenient for the shipping. So we're going to talk about the train for a minute. I found this wonderful postcard on a website from the Anaheim Western Railroad, which served Sturgeon Bay until 1966, and it actually started in Wisconsin much earlier, but again, like electricity, the private companies didn't think that the people up here could afford their services, so it was really slow to get permeated. As I was looking around on this and talking to some people on the DC history, what do they call it, History Geeks, on a Facebook site, I got a response from a person named Andy Laurent, and he sent me this note and this next picture. I have a collection of about 40,000 waybills covering shipments of product on the A&W in the early 1960s. Masterfreeze received mineral rock wool insulation on a fairly regular basis. My understanding is that they unloaded the insulation into one of the warehouses at the fruit growers' cannery in Sturgeon Bay and then trucked it back to Sister Bay as they needed for the factory. So I clipped out the little bits of those top 4 of the stamps the transfers made. So it left on the 10th and it got to Sturgeon Bay on the 17th of August that year. So that was another time is money, the time it takes to ship things. So that was another part of shipping costs, was the time it would take. And then the drivers from Sister Bay have to get to Sturgeon Bay, and these were 2-lane highways back then all the way, pick it up and drive it back. And then when they finished building the panels, the construction crews had to load them up and spend probably a good 2 hours to get to Green Bay before you could really get, out into the world away from the Door Peninsula. So that was another time-consuming effort. This isn't a great photo, but it's one of the more recent ones I could find. And there was change going on in the freezer and refrigeration business. It was much more competitive in the 1960s than it was in 1945. More national companies were doing similar work, and they had shorter supply chains because of their locations. And insulation materials were changing too. Foam was relatively new, along with the traditional wool and fiberglass. They found that retrofitting freezers didn't have foam was very time-consuming and not cost-effective at all. So one of my wonderful conversations with my Uncle Fred, which I'm just blessed that he's living around here and I could talk to him, because he actually worked in the company after he kind of grew up as the son, the one and only son. He told me there was a company called Cooper's that was an insulation competitor of the Armstrong company who came up with thinner panels. They used styrene, which was a new material. They could put more panels on their trucks. That made it more cost efficient too. He said that those techniques eventually pushed Armstrong out of doing this kind of business. And when Armstrong stopped doing it, they said, we're done with Masterfreeze too. They couldn't continue doing it. And of course, this little company up here didn't have the sales force to continue going around the country to keep a business of that scale going. So it was a very gradual decline at the end there. They still had contracts to fulfill after 64. They still were building things, finishing things up. And, it took them about 2 years, but they did rent some storage space to some other groups, some of the other fruit growers. I don't think it was freezer space, but it was just storage. So, 1966 was a very trying time for for my family when my father lost his job. But so did numerous other families lose their wage earners. At about the same time, the researchers and photographers from the National Geographic Society had been studying Door County, and in 1968 put forth a stunning article that kicked off the next wave of tourism and another building boom. So the men at Masterfreeze had gained skills in woodworking, painting, metalwork, and a variety of construction techniques, so they could fairly easily transfer into housing construction. My dad was one of those who did that. He was trained as an electrician by Harry Erickson and then worked for probably close to 20 years with Glenn Fagerstrom. And maybe somebody in these audiences here have worked in construction and might have known Lenny Beckstrom, or if you went to high school with me. All the construction kids, they all knew the older guys. It was just a really wonderful familial connection. Another part of the family connection, my sister prompted me, my mom, Anita, worked at the high school for 20 years. So every time I run across people that were younger than me, they knew her. It's just like kind of this wonderful wraparound community story. All right, I collected a few other little tidbits of information, and I did a lot of these things are from the Advocate, just plugging in the name of the company and seeing what came up. And a lot of, because the building was always called Masterfreeze, all these succeeding companies mentioned it, so they would come up again. There was quite a slew of things that followed. I think the mall was there about 18 years, Walkway Mall. So the final story, the summarizing stuff, what my mother actually told this presentation in 2006, and the building was completely razed in 2008. That little green spot in the center there, that square, and the parking lot next to it was the footprint of the Masterfreeze building. When you see it from the air, it's pretty impressive. And it took the village a while to approve a plan for the Door Hotel. There was some controversy for quite a long time. All right, now, this fun little thing. When I was here in June, Terry says after the presentation, oh, we've got this barn. We've got this toy barn. There it is. There it is. And I just found out yesterday that it belonged to Terry Kramer, because his sister told me that he got the cool toys. And we don't know if it was a purchased or a raffle prize or something, but it was really pretty awesome. I had to do some research to figure out where this came from. There's this company called Ohio Art who made these barns. They started as novelty manufacturing as metal lithography. Everything now is plastic. It wasn't then in the 50s, and I remember seeing a lot of those toys. They had been mostly made in Germany until World War I, but then somehow we stopped trading with Germany. So this company took up the slack and started making more toys. They reported they were actually one of the first ones to license anything from Disney, which is quite a big deal these days. And the woman I talked to said that this farm toy, they sold thousands of them. The Masterfreeze logo on there was a sticker that was added here. They didn't print custom for you, but it was like, I love that. But wait, there's more. I discovered that some of the cooler units are still in effect, although all of them had some updates. The most prominent one is behind the counter of the Door County Ice Cream Factory, which just finished their season this weekend, and they're not open today. But that was the beloved Beach Road Market where we lived, and just wonderful. And I also knew the patio had kept one. It's just storage for a while. But the new owners, which I met last summer, said they got it going again. They've had to fix up something, but it's the kitchen patio now. And they have it used running again. It's cool. It's behind the building, so you can't really see it, unless you're like me and you're Snoopy. And then the latest surprise I had was earlier this summer, my husband and I were eating at the Hugel House in Ellison Bay, and my cousin Courtney happened to be waitressing on us and said, oh, they have a freezer back here. So I poked around with them and got to know the owners there, and they let me sneak back in the corner and take a picture of the Hugel House cooler. And considering that the hillside building was rebuilt in about 1966 after they had a major fire. This may well be one of the very last coolers that Masterfreeze manufactured and installed locally, so it's like just really close to my heart. So if you know any others, if you stumble across anything in the back kitchen, I haven't gone snooping around all the restaurants up here, but especially the older ones that haven't changed much, maybe the Carroll House has one. I'll have to go there for breakfast tomorrow. This is sort of a never-ending story, and I'm going to try to wrap up here, but anything you study with history or genealogy just goes on, and little bits that you never imagine. Oh, I didn't mention that I mentioned several times in the book. I think the Sister Bay Bowl is mentioned 4 times because it shows up in the photos all the time. Not to mention that four generations of my family celebrate her all the time. So this is where it stands for now. Every time I find some new related material, I'm able to add it to my website or do some social media posting about it. So I keep trying to keep the message alive. I'm not overdoing it, but just keep the message floating up there. I'm connected with some of the other Door County groups, which is kind of nice to get some messages going. The book has done well enough in sales that I did a reprint this summer, so there's a whole pretty much fresh batch here tonight. Yes, and I'm still looking for more places to put them, but it's it's a seasonal business up here for the largest, biggest extent. I know people have told me that they bought a copy for their older uncle or something, kind of a trigger for conversations if everybody's together at Thanksgiving or some happy occasion, or maybe not so happy occasion, but to kind of look at the past of where we all came from. Oh, thank you, Mr. Knudsen, for sharing your little bit.
I think I was about 13 years of age, and I remember walking downtown, and there was a sign outside, and it said, "The Green Gorilla Dance" or something.
Yes, it was. A couple people mentioned that when I was looking for information.
And I
went
saw
there
that
too.
in the book too, but
Yeah.
I remember you had to be 16 to go in. And I just thought, okay, in 3 years, I can go in.
Yeah.
And then it I don't know, it just stopped
Yeah,
or something.
it was a temporary, I think one summer, maybe 2. I'm not sure. No one's been able to find a connection of who managed that.
Or
But
started.
it was all ages music venue in the summer for a couple of weekends. No alcohol, it was pretty tame in some ways, but it was a temporary thing, finding uses for that building. That would have been later, maybe 68, 69, somewhere around that.
Was that the area where the Sister Bay baseball field eventually ended up after Masterfreeze?
It had been the baseball field earlier.
The baseball field was behind the bowl.
Yeah. I think that they didn't really necessarily.
Service building is for the village now.
Yeah.
Oh,
From behind the bowl, to east,
Mm-hmm.
into the swampy area.
Yeah. I have a.
Outfielders used to run in water out there.
Place of experience.
Yeah, I have a very dim memory of the baseball field. And the bleachers, I seem to think they were painted green. But I was just on the verge of change. Just reflecting on my life here. I was born in the 50s. Most of the grade schools are gone. Many places have changed names, especially in the last few years. That certain generations are retiring and there's no one who's taking it up, so something new happens. There's some places that just keep up with the changing times, like the bowl. The menu is still the best perch fry in Wisconsin. And then there's the heart of Sister Bay, I like to call it Al Johnson land for a little bit there. But they kept the green space too, and the view of the lake, of the bay rather, that we treasure so much, and wonderful places to watch sunsets. Husby's is not at all like it was when I was a kid. We called it Emma's. And we called the bowl Earl's. First name basis. I don't know why, maybe because there were children our age. But I think I'm about wrapped up here. Oh, yes.
Yeah, one of those first pictures showed an ice box type refrigerator. Do you know where the ice went and where the water?
Ice went up on the top.
Okay, and then what about the water?
There was a drip pan. I had to
And
be.
then how would that be empty?
Yep,
Very often?
probably. Depends on how hot the summer was. I don't remember, I mean, I never saw one in real life or used them, but my mother talked about it from time to time.
Masterfreeze delivered the ice. I remember the truck backing into our cottage, and the guy taking the measurements and his big leather apron and taking a saw in and cutting it down to the right size and putting it in the ice box.
We used to play in the ice house
Yeah.
next to the lumber yard.
That's pretty interesting.
No, we never smoked. Too much sawdust.
Too much sawdust. That reminds me of a tale I heard one of the videos of the boys who grew up in Sister Bay had a presentation here a while ago, and I watched that online. And they said something about smoking in the ice house. Okay, well, I think I'm done here. Thank you again for inviting me. It's been a pleasure working with everyone from the Historical Society. You're so welcoming. So I just want to remind you that we are living history too. Our times are moving right along as the old days did. And we have to remember to keep the stories alive. So ask the old folks and poke at the young folks and tell them to put down their phone and listen to you. And thank you again.
You did a great job.
Thank you.